Welcome back to Restless. I'm Father Joseph Gill, priest of the Diocese of Bridgeport, Connecticut, and you've joined myself and Matt as we restlessly seek the face of Christ in the midst of today's crazy and mixed up world. And, you know, you're probably listening to this or watching it on YouTube or some of our many channels because you love Catholic media. Whatever that Catholic media is, whether you listen to podcasts, whether you listen to EWTN Radio, Veritas Catholic Network, 1350 AM, whether you read different articles. So a lot of us do get a lot of Catholic media every day. And so I want to hear from Matt, and I'll share my own experience about what's the best Catholic media, how much is too much, how can we keep a good perspective on, can we overdo Catholic media? And just kind of like, what is the current state of Catholic media today? And since Matt works full time for Veritas Catholic Network, he's got unique insight into that. So first, Matt, what Catholic media do you consume regularly?
Podcasts. Yeah, podcasts.
Okay, what are your favorites?
My favorite Catholic podcast is probably Pints with Aquinas.
Okay,
which is like, it's like heresy for me to say that, as someone who works for Veritas and didn't pick Let Me Be Frank.
Is Pints with Aquinas on EWTN Radio?
Pints with Aquinas is on the Best of the Rest page on EWTN Radio.
Okay.
And The Tangent and Restless are very near to Pints with Aquinas on the
I hope people accidentally click on us.
Yes, exactly. That's my hope as well. So I listen to a lot of Pints with Aquinas. And I like the Being Human podcast by Dr. Greg Bottaro from Catholic Psych.
Okay. Yeah.
So I like the intertwining of Catholicism and psychology a lot. So those two are probably two of my favorites.
That's funny. I'm not a podcast guy at all. I don't listen to any
that
podcasts.
Is funny considering that you're like a podcast pro.
I don't have time.
5 years later.
And sometimes I'm like, just get to the point, man. Like the time people send me, listen to this. And I'm like 10 minutes in. I'm like, you're still bantering. Come on.
Right. And that's why we start all of our Restless episodes with 5 to 10 minutes of banter. Maybe not that much.
It's the only time I get to make fun of Matt. So
that's it. Yeah.
I do read a lot of Catholic news. So the Pillar is one of my favorites.
I like the Pillar a lot.
Every day. The Pillar is excellent.
I like the Pillar a lot.
National Catholic Register is very good. Catholic World
Report,
which both of those are run by EWTN.
Okay,
which are awesome.
Yeah.
Occasionally, I'll branch out to the other side and read like National Catholic Reporter or something that's perhaps a little bit more on the left-leaning side, shall we say?
A little bit on the left-leaning, yeah.
Just to kind of see, different perspectives. But
yeah. I definitely like the Pillar a lot. Shout out to J.D. Flynn for being on Let Me Be Frank.
Yes, please like and subscribe, J.D. Flynn. I like about that and all of those really is not only the news, but sometimes the in-depth articles about maybe saints I've never heard of, or what's the Pillar does some fantastic articles about what is the church like in Swahili or in like Finland. And I'm like, that's cool. Like to know how's the church practiced in other worlds. And it's funny because, as a priest, I get a sabbatical every 15 years. And so coming up in about 3 years, I get a sabbatical, God willing. And
that's like 3 to 6 months?
Generally 3 months, but depending what you do. Yeah. And a lot of the ideas that I've gotten of stuff I want to do has come from reading the Pillar articles, because they're like, oh, here's the church, here's an area of the church like the Falkland Islands, which were English speaking, and see a priest twice a year. And I'm like, dude, I could be a missionary down there. That'd be so cool. It's down off the coast of South America, and or they had something about this boys town over in the Philippines. And I'm like, oh man, that'd be so cool to go and do a missionary work over in the Philippines. So like getting all kinds of ideas about stuff I'll hopefully do if God wills it. But
so Catholic media is interesting to me because it has, other than the fact that it's my 9 to 5, but it played a huge role in my reversion to the faith because I feel like I was catechized by Father Mike Schmitz in the latter years of college, because I had a profound experience where I was convinced of theism, and then Christianity.
Theism, that God exists, yeah.
Yeah, and that God is involved. So not like a push the domino God, you know?
Yeah.
And then Christianity, but then specifically Catholicism. And it was like I was convinced of Catholicism because I encountered Catholic media. Like that is where I made my decision of Catholicism over other denominations.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and it was in large part it was due to watching debates between Catholics and Protestants, you know? Because admittedly I didn't look all too much into Orthodoxy, but it was because my wife Renee at the time was Presbyterian, you know? So it was like I became convinced of Christianity, but had no depth of apologetics and was like, I have no idea where to go here. And so I just started watching Father Mike Schmitz and Pints with Aquinas because Matt Fradd was hosting debates. And so where I'm going with this, though, is Catholic media, along with like basically every other podcasting genre, you know, and other kinds of digital entertainment, has really grown. And now we have things that we didn't have before, like Hallow or you know, on the Ascension YouTube channel, like Pray with the CFRs. And I think that there's this interesting place where if you wanted, like, you could basically be catechized exclusively on the internet, you know?
Yeah, which is interesting. And I struggle with that as a priest who does media work because I have such a passion for working with the media. I think it's a great way to evangelize. And it's good to hear your story because for me personally, I've never been really evangelized through the media per se. The only media that really was very influential in my spiritual life was music. And it wasn't so much Catholic music because most Catholic music that I found, to be honest, I'm not really a big fan of most Catholic music. And it's kind of cheesy.
Few.
Yeah, it's very few. And so I had some great Protestant artists back in the late 90s, early 2000s who really kind of mentored me in my faith. And so that was impactful. So I wonder, like, it's nice to hear stories of like, the Catholic media really did make an impact in my life. Because sometimes I wonder, like, you know, I would do Restless. Does that make any difference? All these podcasts I do.
Yeah, I mean, it is something that, so like I've talked to Steve Lee about this because whenever we hear a good story about someone being impacted by our work, it comes to him, you know, like nobody emails me and is like, thank you, you know, which is fine, you know? But I have said to him, like, hey, when you get those calls or you get those emails, let me know about them because we have as Catholic media producers, we have no desire to minister in this way if it doesn't bear fruit. You know, like, I'm getting that from, you know, and I'm getting that from Stephanie Gray Connors because she talked about how when she was doing pro-life ministry on college campuses, it was really important that they see people change their mind because they had no interest in being there if people weren't changing their minds. You know, like they were there to change minds and hearts. And we're here to change minds and hearts. But sometimes posting a podcast and hitting publish is like licking the envelope, putting it in the mail and being like, go, you know?
Like, you never know where it's going to go.
And you never hear back from it again, you know? And so, I mean, I can tell you that. Yeah, please.
But so the question, though, I guess I would have for you and for all of us is, you know, how much of evangelization, though, really has to be done in person, you know, with a relationship? Because Pope Francis is big into this, like, accompaniment, and even our Bishop Caggiano, is all about that, you know, one-on-one ministering to a person, which you can't really do anonymously when I'm just listening to a podcast. And so where's that line kind of get crossed?
I think most real change comes via person to person. And that's not to discount Catholic media. Like, as someone was obviously really impacted by it and believes in it wholeheartedly enough to make it the thing I dedicate a huge portion of my time to, you know? But when I look at Catholic media, what can it do? It can inform, and that's awesome and necessary. You have to be catechized. It can evangelize, so it can introduce you to the person of Christ, and that's awesome, and it's necessary. And it can help you defend the faith, so you can you know, learn apologetics, and that's awesome, and it's necessary, you know? And like, so all of those things are there.
Well, I think that's important because that breaks down barriers to evangelization. Because,
Right.
as Fulton Sheen said, right, only 100 people in this country hate the Catholic Church, but tens of thousands hate what they think the Catholic Church is.
Right.
So going online, and it's funny, we have a mutual friend named Angelo, who I was having dinner with last night, and he was telling me about his own conversion because he was born Catholic, but then fell away from the Catholic Church because he wanted to find a real, authentic, personal relationship with Christ, which he only found in the Protestant Church. But he found that his Protestant pastor, a Presbyterian, was starting to baptize infants. And he started to take umbrage with that. And he said, well, wait a second, like baptism is about your personal decision to follow Jesus. How can these babies, make any sort of personal decision? And he said, and the pastor simply said, well, I'm just doing what the early church did. And so he went on a quest, Angelo did, to try to find whether or not the early church baptized infants. And upon reading the early church fathers, upon reading the scripture citations where the church did baptize infants, that broke down all the walls where now he was ready to say, let me give the Catholic Church a second look, because if they're right on this, then maybe they're right on everything else too.
Right.
So I think the articles.
I think it tills the soil.
Right.
Like the fact of the matter is that, there's a couple of situations that you can be in and encounter Catholic media. And like this is why I really do believe in it. Like I have been the guy who's doom scrolling Instagram and then sees a quote from some random saint about how I should be using my time, and then like proceeds to get off the app and potentially delete it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I switched over to a Wise phone. You know what I mean? Like I don't have an iPhone. And there's no doubt in my mind that seeing things like that on Catholic media have informed my decisions.
True. I've written homilies based on stuff I found on Facebook.
Right, this shouldn't be surprising. The Lord uses everything,
Yeah.
Even my own sin, which is not to suggest that Catholic media is a sin, but the point is that like nothing gets wasted by God, and so you could be in a couple situations. You could be the Catholic who just like gets a little boost by seeing someone witness, You could be. I have personally experienced episodes. I mentioned it in a previous episode where on The Tangent we interviewed Father Vincent Lampert and he was an exorcist. Well, like I'm telling you that all of the former Catholics or fallen away Catholics in my family, when they heard that I interviewed an exorcist, they all wanted to listen to that episode.
That's so funny. People have this weird vision of like exorcists as like the coolest people in the world. Like,
yeah.
They're actually pretty normal, but
I know. Meanwhile, and it's really funny too because Father Vincent is like very meek and like soft spoken. Like he's the opposite of the Hollywood exorcist, But the other thing is like I booked Father Vincent knowing that would happen. It was 100% an intentional move. I did it around Halloween. I was like,
well, of course. There you go.
I was like, I know people that won't listen to some of my episodes will listen to this.
And that could be the gateway, right?
Right, and it can be a
listening
gateway
to the rest. And now, the Eucharist, that's interesting. Let's poke on that one.
Right. I mean, in a sense, that's what happened in my own reversion. So like to show you the balance between media and accompaniment, right? Like I reconverted to the Catholic faith because specifically, I guess, to Christianity at first, because a Protestant friend of mine used to drive me to school every day in college. I had class off campus, but I didn't have a car, and we drove every day. And then like 2 months or something into us driving together, he just looked over at me and out of the blue said, "Hey man, what do you think of Jesus?" And I was like,
what a conversation starter.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, we were pals by this point. Like the thing that we did together was sing in an a cappella group and play Super Smash Brothers. You know what I mean? Like he wasn't shoving Christianity down my throat.
Normal dude, yeah.
Yeah, And so he was just willing to be my friend. And when he asked me this, I felt comfortable enough to say, well, I don't think I really believe in him. And he said, why not? And the best thing that I could come up with was, well, I don't think I want to. And he said, well, you know what, Matt, you should probably have a better reason than that. To which I said some things that I would now regret. But the point is that he was accompanying me there. But like, and so that was like a real kick in the butt. It really, like, genuinely it was. But one of the things that played a huge role in coming back was a separate friend, like, again, in the providence of God, giving me a book called The Case for Faith. And it was just an argument from apologetics written by a Protestant journalist investigating the historical veracity of Jesus Christ as God, Yeah. And it was like, okay, so there's that combo, like Catholic media, and accompaniment. And so there seems to me to be an obvious benefit to Catholic media.
Well, what's so interesting when I hear all kinds of conversion stories, myself, my deepening faith, your conversion story, Angelo's, and everyone else, there's very rarely is there a moment. It's more a process.
Oh,
And the
totally.
process has lots of different factors to it, including Catholic media, including accompaniment, including our own prayer life, our own thinking, maybe a tragedy, whatever that brings us back. So yeah, it can be. I think Catholic media can be a step, not the defining moment, but a step.
Yeah.
And
the
maybe
thing
it is a
that's
defining moment. Who knows?
Well, the thing that's interesting too is that like, let's go via negativa, right? Which is like, well, what I mean by that is
No, go there. I know
it's not what we don't mean. And no, I'm using it improperly. That's why I'm saying that. It's not what I don't mean, but rather like a negative view upon media. I don't know a single Christian, like a real Orthodox Christian, who would look at a movie with a ton of pornography and say, well, that has no effect on their mind and their worldview.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so it's like, well, what is media? Like media is, I mean, I guess to an extent, media is not strictly neutral in the sense that like when you use TikTok a lot, you're used to a lot of dopamine hits. And so you begin to think in a more shallow way, meaning like you can't be focused for as long. Okay, fair enough. But there's also a view of media that I think you can at least include in some way, shape, or form, which is that media can be used to spread truth, goodness, and beauty.
Right.
Or it can be used to spread falsehood and ugliness and evil.
Yeah. Why should only Satan have possession of this incredibly powerful tool of media?
Right. Exactly.
So yeah, absolutely. I mean, Jesus says preach the gospel at all. Preach the gospel, not at all times, if necessary. Use words that's attributed to Saint Francis, but not true.
Right. But so like there's an obvious utilization of media, which brings me to something like Hallow. So I brought Hallow up before. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because I've heard people use Hallow to get started and then find themselves dependent upon the app in order to pray. And so what I want to talk about is like, let's assume that someone does engage in Catholic media, and does so frequently. Like they either read a lot of Catholic books which is good, or listen to a lot of Catholic podcasts, which is good. But they've come to realize that it's standing in the way, meaning like, let's say they do a daily holy hour, and what they find is they spend 50 of the 60 minutes reading Fulton Sheen, which it's like, you could do a lot worse, So I'm not saying that it's strictly speaking bad. It's just clearly imperfect, I think. So like, what's the proper balance if you are going to engage in it in goodwill? You're seeking growth. You know what I mean?
Well, I want to mention 3 dangers with Catholic media.
Okay.
So one of them is precisely that, is making our faith primarily about content and less about relationship. And it's great to read, listen to a Catholic podcast for 20 minutes, but if you haven't prayed for 20 minutes that day, use that time better and pray rather than listening and consuming media, because it's not about how much you know about our Catholic faith. It's about how much you love God.
Right.
At the end of the day, you don't have to be Thomas Aquinas to get into heaven. So you have to make sure that you're having that prayer life, which sometimes Catholic media can distract from. Right. A second danger that's very, very real is the politicization of Catholic media.
Totally.
I have no problem reading articles about Joe Biden and what he did, but a lot of times I realize it drags me down, and it causes me to frankly just think less about a person. Sometimes a lot of, even on the Pillar, a lot of the Catholic media is about this scandal, this priest, committed this crime and this and that. Right. And like, what's the point? Why do I need to know that? I don't. And it's kind of like spiritual gossip.
Can I push on that a little bit?
Please.
So I'm not pushing on your personal reaction to it, but rather the validity of the Pillar doing that, in the sense that it is good, I think, right, for the truth of those matters to come to light. And the reason is because two reasons. One, like, let's say that no one ever talked about the scandals of the church, and then you personally experienced one. That would be a great cause, if you will, for leaving the faith. Whereas if it's Whereas the proliferation of the knowledge of the scandals of the church kind of makes us all say, okay, well, like something's amiss, and what's that thing that's amiss? It's that we're sinners, like,
And
so
it is good that it's being brought to light, because sweeping it under the rug doesn't cure the problem.
right, yeah, and so we're sinners, and we need to take some action here.
But I'm just thinking about, from an individual Catholic standpoint, are
Totally.
we clicking on clickbait just because it's an interesting story, but we don't really need to know it for our spiritual life?
Yeah, and I would even make the argument that one of the ways that this shows up most frequently is with content related to Pope Francis. It's like, what's our obligation as Christians, and specifically Catholics? We are called to pray for the Pope. He is the pastor of the entire church. You know what I mean? Like, you can speak to it being a pastor of a parish in Monroe, Connecticut, and how hard that is. And it's like he has
less
everybody.
hard than the Pope.
You know what I mean? He has everybody. So it's like we should be praying for the Pope because he's the Pope. He is the universal pastor. So it's like, okay, when I read Catholic media, what ends up happening? Maybe he's done something that warrants my frustration. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not pretending that the Pope is perfect, Like it seems to me obvious that he's done things that warrants the frustration of certain people, because he's not perfect. But is that helpful? Do I need to read Pope Francis's Twitter?
Because everything in much modern news cycle is just simply just outrage media.
Right.
It's just really about just trying to get clicks. And
it's like I love Pope Benedict XVI's theology. I love John Paul II's theology, and the two men themselves, although I would say that I know more about John Paul II's life, right? But it's like they also made mistakes, and they didn't have as much of a 24-hour news cycle.
Right, and that's a big thing.
You know what I mean? So it's like, also how much of this is just forgetting the modern world that we live in, that like I hear everything Pope Francis does, and would I be equally as frustrated with other popes if they lived now?
I think there's a great element of holiness of just simply minding one's own business.
Yeah.
It's nice to know the news, and I check the news every day just to be able to have conversations with people, but there is a sense in which spiritually ignorance can be bliss.
Yeah.
If you don't need to know about someone else's sins,
right.
How's that helping me? How's it helping them? Unless I'm truly moved to prayer, which a lot of people are not, but we should.
Right.
So,
right. What do you think about the idea that the modern priest has to have the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other?
For diocesan priests, I definitely agree with that.
You do?
Absolutely.
How does that not fall into the ignorance is bliss, though?
Mainly because I'm responsible not just for my own soul. I'm responsible for the souls of the people around me. Much like if when your son grows up and becomes a teenager and says, "Hey, Dad, can I watch this movie?"
Right.
You need to know what movie that is.
Absolutely.
And so you got to do your own research. And,
quite frankly, we're not like actually compiling a list, But like, for example, like I decided
inapproved movies.
Right. Yeah. But I decided like something like 4 or 5 weeks ago that I was going to reread Harry Potter. Like assuming that there's a good chance might want to read it.
And now you're reading it with a different lens, because you're reading it with, and that's when I consume the news, I'm always reading it with that lens of, what do my people need to know about this thing that's happening here? How's it going to impact their life, and particularly their spiritual life?
Right.
So that I can address it either in a homily or bulletin column or just in conversations, being like, "Hey, did you hear about this thing that happened?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, I did. And here's the proper Catholic understanding of it."
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so that was 1 and 2. What's the third thing you wanted to say?
The third one, the third danger is to put Catholic media stars on pedestals. And that can be a big thing, because a lot of people put me on a pedestal, and I'm just
yeah. You are a star, Father Joseph.
No, not but, God bless Father Mike Schmitz. God bless Chris Stefanik and all these great guys.
Yeah.
But we got to pray for them, because I'll tell you, the devil wants to work on them so much harder than me and you. Because their reach is so great.
Right.
And it can be a real danger that if they leave the church, or if they say something false, or just have a crisis of faith, we're gonna fall into our own crisis personally. And I remember back in the late 90s, there was that issue with Father John Carapi.
Okay.
who,
I don't know who that is.
yes, Father John Carapi was a wonderful public speaker. I mean, he gave just really hard-hitting, solidly orthodox talks, and he got caught in some scandal. I think it was financial. It wasn't sexual, but and a lot of people were really shaken. Like, here's this person that I looked up to, this person that I admired so much. So it's just important for all of us to put no one on a pedestal except Jesus and Mary and the saints.
Right.
So that's why I personally feel like an extra obligation is upon me, because as a priest, you're a public person, but as a priest who works in the media, you're an even more public person.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely an element of spiritual warfare on people who are evangelists.
Yeah.
Period.
I think anyone who works in the media has spiritual warfare. I mean, even people like Taylor Swift, or because if someone like that became a really fervent Christian, think about how many billions of people literally that would impact.
Yeah.
More than I'll ever reach in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting too, because that's a good example, because over the summer, Taylor Swift was on tour, and there was a whole element of her concert that was like related to witchcraft or something like that,
Yeah, there was.
And that showcases that it is also in that negative. It's not just what if they became a Christian. It's, well, what if they really embrace this kind of neo-paganism?
Right. The danger.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the power of the media, to influence and to change our.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, from the practical perspective, right? Like, what do you think an appropriate amount of media consumption is, and especially versus entertainment? I think I've mentioned this on the show before, but it is worth repeating. Father Gregory Pine recently made a spiritual direction video, he calls them, for Pines with Aquinas, where he said that on average, you should spend an hour or less on entertainment per week.
Per week?
Per week.
Wow.
Entertainment being not something like, well, if you go to a play and it builds you up, that's not strictly entertainment, right? Like, there's real leisure there. And his argument was that you're
turning your brain off.
Yeah, like you went home and you put on the football game, or you watched yet another episode of The Office, something like that, And I think that this is like a perennial modern problem, because we are absolutely surrounded by entertainment.
What was that great book by Neil Postman called "Amusing Ourselves to Death"? It was making that whole point that we're very stultified by it.
Right. And so what is a real proper amount of good Catholic media that is not strictly entertainment, right? Like, because it does build you up, but there's definitely a place where it becomes too much.
Yeah.
Right. So what's a good balance, you think?
I think part of that depends upon your state in life and your vocation.
As does basically everything else.
Right. Yeah. So like a diocesan priest would have to, stay up on a lot more perhaps than a religious priest, or, a father of a family has probably a lot of obligation just to stay up on, perhaps the trends that the kids are watching, or this or that. So so it depends on your vocation. So I don't know if I can give a hard and fast rule as to how much you should do, and it also depends on what's your job, how much free time do you have.
Yeah,
but
I think at least it's fair to say, just to repeat what you had said earlier, which is, it's about relationship and not information.
I would say you should not be consuming more entertainment or Catholic media than you are praying. So if you're praying 20 minutes a day, then I think it would be legitimate to you read 20 minutes of some Catholic newspaper or something like that.
Right. Yeah, that seems like a good rule. Good thing I work in Catholic media and spend about 8 hours a day on it.
But again, that's your job. So that's your how you bring home the bacon.
Yeah, I know. Man, I have to go pray for 8 hours.
Yeah, you really need it. What, you got 8 hours of sleep, 8 hours of prayer, 8 hours of work. I don't know what's the big deal.
Renee can go figure something else out.
Eating is not that important, okay?
Yeah. Okay.
So
great.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this discussion. It's been helpful.
Yeah, me too.
Helpful to articulate some thoughts, and hopefully our listeners will not tune out of Restless. But
What we want you to do is to let go of all other Catholic media but us.
Yes, exactly. But again, definitely spend your time in prayer. Make sure that that's what you do. Don't put people on pedestals. Make sure that you also, just live a balanced life. Don't consume too much. Don't consume negative media, even negative Catholic media, and keep it all focused on Christ. It is good news that we come to preach.
Amen.
So thank you for finding us on Veritas Catholic Network, 1350 AM, 103.9 FM, and wherever you get your podcasts, also on YouTube and social media. So tune in next time to Restless.